I'm Harv Nagra. I'm an operations consultant, a former in house agency operations director, and head of brand communications at Scoro. Welcome to The Handbook, the Agency Operations Podcast, a space where we talk to fellow experts and operations leaders about agency life, discussing the challenges keeping us up at night, as well as strategies that help make things run a little bit smoother. Hey, y'all, welcome back. A distinction we can make between businesses at various stages of maturity is how well they have best practices defined centrally and are thus consistent in the way they work, whether they have the kinds of tools that give them good data, not just looking backwards, but tools that allow them to forecast, and how well they use that data and those forecasts to steer where they're going. At earlier stages of maturity, you're quite likely to be using an assortment of tools that require you or your team to spend a considerable amount of time copying information from one platform or spreadsheet to another to do your work and to get the visibility that you need. Things like Harvest, Avaza, Toggle, Monday, Asana, the list goes on. But we've talked about the benefits of consolidation in a previous episode. Today, I wanted to take that further. Let's say you're using disparate tools today. You're recognizing that the way you're working isn't scalable and you're ready to go to the next level. Or maybe you're already using a professional services automation tool and looking to move to another platform. How do you actually define what you need? How do you find and qualify what your options are? And how do you actually go about translating what you're doing today into the new system? That's the topic of today's episode. Our guest today is Matthew Pang. Matt is a seasoned software advisor with nearly 20 years of experience working with service-based businesses, advising on digital transformation, cloud technologies, and best practice. He's passionate about helping businesses streamline their ops and maximize efficiency through smart, tailored solutions. And he's got a lot of experience in our space. Matt works closely with agencies and consultancies, coaching ops teams to implement tools to improve productivity and service delivery. Matt's consultancy, Business Continuum, supports businesses through implementation planning and training, ensuring that they get the most out of their technology investments. I really enjoyed talking to Matt, and I'm excited for you to hear it. Let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Matt. Really excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Harv. Thanks for having me.
So, I understand that your team at Business Continuum supports other businesses that might need help with things like digital transformation, identifying issues in workflows, figuring out what platforms they need, and even supporting with implementation. Is there anything I've missed there?
Yeah, I mean, the main focus is to really help businesses navigate that change. It's all about that human technology interaction and making that as seamless as possible.
Excellent. So, what kinds of platforms do you help other businesses assess?
Yeah, we work predominantly with all forms of operational software, whether it be accounting, project management tools, workflow, payroll processing, and productivity tools for employees.
Matt, you know that our audience is ops folks, and I know you work with a lot of businesses in that space. Before we started recording, you were talking about best practice. There's something you were saying around best practice comes down to the agency that you're working with. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I get asked about best practice all the time. Lots of businesses, big and small, they have processes that are perhaps immature or need workshopping, and they're always looking
Yeah.
for external advice as to how perhaps other agencies I've worked with might handle certain problems or navigate certain workflows. And I really have to ensure that I assess what's going to be the right fit for that agency. It's about what's best practice for them with the tools that they have in front of them.
Right. I like that because what works for somebody else doesn't necessarily fit what you need. So I think it's really important to identify that, isn't it? So that's kind of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today: identifying an agency's needs, sourcing and selecting a platform, and implementation. And this can, I think, broadly apply to any kind of tool they might be looking to bring in, whether it's a CRM system, an accounting platform, and so on. But we today are going to focus on professional services automation because one, these platforms are what agencies look to when they're getting more mature and larger. They start recognizing that they need a platform like this for efficiency. And number two, these kind of platforms have very broad functionality. So it's a more complex decision deciding what you need and what matches your needs and bringing it in. But before we dive in, Matt, professional services automation is such a clunky label for these kinds of platforms. Can you tell us what that is in your own words?
Yeah, I define a PSA as a system that will allow a business, a professional service based business, to rinse and repeat processes within their business efficiently. So, what I mean by that
Hmm.
is everything to navigate proposal preparation, project, tasking, resource planning through to
Hmm.
finance. If you don't have that finance function, it's really just a workflow tool.
Like I said in the intro, a reason a business might decide to move to a PSA is that they're recognizing that they're facing issues with efficiency and visibility due to the mix of tools that they might be using today. And in order to grow, they need to streamline things. But there might be agencies out there that are already using a PSA platform and looking to move to another. Do you see much of that happening? And if so, why do they look to make that switch?
Yeah, some agencies that I work with tend to outgrow their current systems and solutions. So, whether that's through additional arms of their business, additional
Mm,
headcount. The other
mm,
reason why would be that they just feel like it's clunky or it's a little bit broken as a
mhm,
process and as a system. And just going back to that automation piece in PSA, they don't feel like they're getting that velocity that they need and want out of their system, and so
mm.
they look elsewhere.
And in my experience, because the product we were using was shut down by the provider. I don't know if you were familiar with Deltek's Traffic Live, but we were on that many years ago, and then it got shut down. So we had to go back to the drawing board and start sourcing a new platform. I think you've done some work with Workflow Max, which is just kind of shut down recently as well.
Yeah, that's right. It can happen that some software applications get sunsetted if they
Yeah.
don't get the traction that they want and need, and they're not constantly developing the application and getting that subscriber base up.
Mm,
In my time, I've seen many applications. Basecamp was one of the early ones that was really, really promising and
mm,
was really great to use, but then it sort of was underdeveloped, and you've got other
mm.
tools in market that are growing from strength to strength, and that can also be another reason that the threat of the plug being pulled.
That's a good point. I think it's important to look at the velocity of product updates and things like that to reassure yourself, but we'll get into some of that stuff. So, Matt, I wanted to start at the top. Let's say there's an agency listening, they've decided that they need to make a switch. Either they're moving from something that is no longer fitting their needs, it's a PSA platform, but maybe they've outgrown the functionality or it's being sunset, or there's an agency using a lot of different tools and they're recognizing some of the pains that we're mentioning there and looking to go to a consolidated platform. Can you walk us through how you would approach understanding an agency's specific requirements? I'm just wondering what our listeners can learn from your process that could help them get more clarity on their own needs before they go searching in the market.
Yeah, I get engaged or inquiries from various types of people within agencies. I'll get engaged
Yep.
by a general manager or head of operations, or perhaps owners of the agencies as well. They're coming to me with varying needs. So, someone from an owner's standpoint wants to ensure that there's a strong pipeline of work and the quality of work is being delivered to a high standard, and they get visibility that their projects are sort of being delivered to time and budget. And from an
Hmm.
operations standpoint, they're very concerned about, do we have the right resourcing to meet the demands of our clients, to be able to grow effectively, and ensure that we have the right sort of level of skills within the business
Mm,
to service all the work. I will always, when approached by an agency, want to also hear from other perspectives, like the creatives and the traffic managers of sorts, the practice manager who's actually dealing with a lot of the day-to-day work issues, and even from a finance standpoint. So getting viewpoints and hearing the voices of other stakeholders is critical to really understanding what the problem is and sort of corroborating that story.
So you do interviews, and does that include workshops, or is it kind of one and the same where you just try to pick people's brains about what they need, what they do, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we absolutely do design workshops with our clients. And at that point,
Hmm.
we are pretty much interviewing stakeholders to understand
Hmm.
the optimal workflow, right from
Mm,
quoting through to project setup and delivery, and how they control, resource plan, and deliver, right through to finance function and time capture. So there's always going to be about 20 to 30 key workflows within an agency that I'm looking for to optimize and really understand the nuances of, to ensure that the software is being configured well to their needs.
Do you think it's useful for the ops director that might be listening to this to start documenting that in a spreadsheet of functionality for those workflows that you're describing so you get a bit of a list going for your needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Both what they need from an ops standpoint and also what they're
Mhm.
lacking as well.
So, we've had these workshops, we've done these interviews, we have an idea of our main workflows in delivering a project from the quoting process right through the final invoices and all that kind of stuff. And so we've got the hard requirements. Beyond this, are there any kind of universal considerations that you think somebody should add to their list of requirements?
Yeah, I think you should really have a open mind and greenfields approach to the types of capabilities you think you need for now and into the future. I don't think you
Hmm.
should limit yourself by price in terms of
Mm,
how much the software might cost. You should really look at the capabilities and what you're wanting to achieve and or automate through the software first and foremost. Working with a lot of these agencies as well, they themselves are being scrutinized for price to their clients, and they don't want their clients to necessarily make decisions based or limited on price. They want to give them the
mhm,
best options out there with the highest likelihood of success and reach. And similarly
mm,
with software, you want to sort of see what the Rolls Royce of software can potentially do versus the cheap and cheerful solutions. I think you have to be open minded what that trade off is,
mm,
and you really do get
mhm,
what you pay for.
mhm,
I think that with the rapid pace of technology, you want to choose a platform that has promise when it comes to extendability and integrations
mhm,
with very popular tools that sort of
mm.
extend the capability of the agency.
Really good point. And I think another reason why extendability is important is that this extended universal platforms, that might not be stuff that you need today, but it allows you to kind of future proof your investment, doesn't it? Because you don't know that in 3 years you might be building something or you might be bringing in a new platform. And this just ensures that when you need that functionality of having the open API, your developers will be able to work with it and build something.
Absolutely. Technology is ever evolving, and having something like Zapier, for instance, as a hub to an ever growing set of solutions, it just creates more choice as the needs and requirements of the business change, while sort of creating that stability with a PSA that can connect to many applications. The other sort of non-negotiables, it must integrate with our Google platform or our Microsoft
Mm,
365 platform. How
mhm,
elegantly will it need to
mhm.
align with that from a single sign-on capability and security standpoint, for sure. With the agency sector, UX and UI is such a big, it's a discussion point around, agency creatives always want to go to work and just feel like they're using something beautiful and aesthetic.
Mm.
That always becomes a huge factor in system selection as well.
I like that you mentioned that. When I speak to people that are looking for the right fit, this isn't often high on their list. Whereas for me, it is high on my list. It's probably also because I've used a really horrible platform like Traffic Live, which did everything we needed it to do, but the interface just felt super dated and it just felt really tedious to get anything done. So the team was just not very excited to spend a lot of their day in this platform. And I remember that there's some kind of study that was done on usability at one point where they had two ATM machines and one had a really ugly interface, but the same buttons in the same place. And the other one was just really aesthetically pleasing. And they got users to test both. And people felt that the prettier one was easier to use, even though the experience was exactly the same, which I thought was really interesting. But again, for me, I wouldn't want my team to feel like really miserable using a platform that is clunky. And in this space, we are used to designing beautiful interfaces, looking at beautiful designs all day. So your team is probably got high expectations. And I think usability, user experience, the user interface is important. All right. So there was a few factors that you'd mentioned. I will throw in a couple more
Yeah,
that I would add to the list of this requirements that we're building. I would say, we've been talking about extendability, but if you're using Zero or Sage, put that in the list and say, we want it to interface with this. And beyond that, you might want to look at whether if you're a multi-entity business, important just to bear that in mind. Is this platform going to support multi-entity? So put that in there. Do you need to work in multiple currencies? The reporting needs are actually really important to add to the list as well. What kind of reports do you look at today, and what kind do you want to look at in the future, and keeping that in mind when you're kind of sourcing the platform as well. I think as you get more mature as a business, you don't want to just look back, but you want to get visibility on what's coming your way. So having visibility on utilization, capacity, on your revenue forecasting, all of that kind of stuff. At the same time, I don't want to say that this list needs to get really overwhelming where almost nothing qualifies, but it's just important to keep those things in mind, that you're kind of moving to a consolidated platform, not just for the more accelerated workflows and efficiency and kind of data quality, but also for the visibility it gives you, and not just looking back, but looking forward is something to bear in mind.
absolutely.
So, Matt, we've generated this list maybe in a spreadsheet of kind of the functionality we need under different headings, the quoting, the finances, project management requirements, connections, all that kind of stuff. But how would you recommend to somebody that they go and do this research now that they've got this list? Where can they go source platforms?
Yeah, very popular platform that is often referred to is G2 Crowd, or GetApp is another one that you can also look at to
Okay.
actually see what sort of solutions are in market or
Hmm.
for various categories, and some of them
Hmm.
offer comparisons of feature for feature, even if you haven't included them on the list. So that it's a good way to sort of sense check what you're thinking as well. They offer reviews, but when was the last time, and how often are people reviewing your software? I think that the ones that are
Hmm.
in the last 3 months are probably the ones that you should really value more. And again, like I said before, software is changing all the time, so capabilities are evolving, and so the more relevant reviews or are the ones that are done in a recent time span.
Yep, that's a good point. So, I mean, there's also the element of like just doing some desk research in Google, typing in professional services automation and seeing what comes up. Perhaps talking to your community and seeing what your employees have used at other agencies in the past that they've liked, and maybe skipping the ones that they said were miserable. But you might get some information there. I like that you mentioned G2. I have used G2, and you're right. It does have layers of information. It's got the reviews, it's got the features list and stuff like that. The way I personally use G2 is just to get a list of names, and then I go and do my own research. So what I tend to do is look at those graphs that are kind of in four quadrants, and they have the bigger contenders versus the smaller, and the more popular versus least popular, something like that. I think it just gives you a nice list of names that you can go pop onto their website, see if you like what you're seeing and reading, and if it's starting to align with your requirements. That's how I use it anyway. So now we've got our list of requirements. We've kind of sourced our platforms. We found some contenders that seem like they align with what we need. You might set up some demos, might do some test drives. And I think that's a good opportunity to kind of share that list with that provider as well and say, hey, these are the things that we think we need. Do you do all of this stuff? And if not, you have to decide if it's a make or break kind of thing. And I don't know how you feel about this, Matt, but in my view, every platform we use, whether it's Word, whether it's Gmail or HubSpot, they all have their own conventions. So you might go in thinking this is your requirement and this is our workflow, but I think it's important to remain flexible, because ultimately it's the outcome you want to achieve that you should try to align with, not necessarily finding something that matches your workflow exactly, because that's very unlikely to happen unless you're building your own thing. So saying, okay, the platform convention is this. Can that work for us? And it probably can. And there's probably things that you can tweak and customize anyway, but just retaining that flexibility, I think, is helpful. Okay, Matt. So we've selected the product, we've selected the package, and now we're thinking about implementation. Hopefully, the product you've selected has support for onboarding, whether it's the guided process or they support you with onboarding through a support package as well. And in a recent episode, we actually spoke about change management as well, which is a very people oriented process, communication being super key there. But when approaching implementation from legacy systems or disparate systems to a new platform, what advice would you give on that more kind of more technical side of things?
I think where a vendor has resources available to you, when it
Mhm.
comes to implementation, there could be guides on offer, self-paced materials, and you may even want to sort of source partners who may also be in that ecosystem who have proven experience to be able to implement and or migrate from systems. So looking for advice is key and critical to the
Mhm.
architecture phase of the application. I think there's also a possibility that to balance that out a little bit is that actually you can over engineer and actually over architect how the system could
Mm.
be used.
Mhm.
Again, thinking about that less is more approach. A good system is a system that's highly engaged with the user base,
Mhm.
right? So we want to sort of design it so that you don't have to jump through 7 hoops to get the outcome.
Mhm.
And again, going back to what I said earlier is trying to use the functionality for how it should be used at face value versus creating all these additional data points that you may or may not need.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. There's, that might be a fear somebody has is how do we import all our legacy data? And, what would be your advice on that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is to get your active data into the system first and really put it to the test that it's going to give us everything we need to run our business day to
Mhm.
day and ensure that we can sort of see our blind spots in areas around resourcing and capability, for instance. And
Mhm.
then once the dust settles with all of that, when you start to get some of that meaningful reporting data, that's going to then
Mm.
inform how we should load all our legacy data and historical data
Mm.
as well. And I've
Mhm.
recently worked with a business that has had data since 2013. And it's clear to me that their prices, their rates were very different way back then. Their service mix was
Mm.
very different way back then. Their client base was
Mm.
perhaps very different as well. And so, unless
Mhm.
you need that intelligence to understand how many projects and what value and the like, you really need to sort of decide what's useful.
Very good point. What I've done in the past also is import the live projects because you can keep two systems running and say that all new projects are going to be in the new and then the old ones are going to continue to run in the old. But it just depends. If those are short-term projects, that might be fine. But if they're going to drag on for 6 months a year, I personally don't think I would want my team to be using two platforms because then you continue to have this old practice and you're trying to encourage people to use a new system and new best practices well. So, what I would do is move those live projects over.
Mhm.
And what I've done is with those legacy systems, just reduced it to one license. So if we need to go back and analyze something, whether it's ops or finance needs to go look at an old project or invoice, it's still there. And so just being smart about it because the more you try to bring over, you're just adding complexity and elongating that process of migration, which is probably not necessary.
Yeah, that live work in progress piece, especially where you're potentially straddling two systems, it's
Yeah.
an important point. You do want to draw a line in the sand. One of the easiest things to do actually is to have the account management and the sort of sales staff actually
Hmm.
interacting with the new system first to load potential
Mm,
new projects that will actually convert into projects so that there is that high engagement, high adoption for the new while other projects are
hmm.
being wound down. But to simply capture and port those current projects into the new tool to capture the time so that you
Mm,
can report and resource plan in the one
mhm.
place is the optimal.
Mm. You also mentioned something there about kind of dated rate cards and stuff like that. Moving to a new platform is a good opportunity to do a little review of your quoting practices, your rate cards, and just see what's working for you now and what hasn't been looked at in ages.
Yeah, going back to that earlier point about reporting as well, your systems should give you feedback where there may be
Mhm.
overruns or where there may be underestimation, or perhaps you might embellish and give a little bit more just to win the client. Those sorts of compromises and aspects to quoting in particular, that type of
Mhm.
feedback will inform future practices and so forth and continually help the business evolve to the market pricing and for delivering, sort of similar services, that sort of stuff, that you always have to test to that.
Absolutely. It needs to happen regularly just to make sure you're keeping your processes and your data in a good state and you're remaining profitable ultimately as well.
That's it.
So this implementation stage is where you not only are you making decisions on what data you're putting in, but I suppose this is where, the ops director or who's driving this will also want to test how those workflows that are necessary to deliver work map to the new platform, right? And understanding what adaptations need to be made that tweak the old process and that kind of thing. And in my view, I think it's pretty important for the person that's driving this change has a pretty clear understanding of that full process so that when it comes to troubleshooting or advising, they can be somebody people can look to and say, yeah, this is how you should do this and that. And like I said, we had an episode on change management recently where we talked about what an agency should ensure they're doing as they go forward.
I think training is one key and critical area. If I'm speaking with businesses who have outgrown their systems or the adoption is not as high and they're looking for a new system, is because there is not enough documentation or adequate training and retraining as well as new features get added into the mix. Investing in that knowledge of best practice within that business is going to ensure that people leverage the software as best as possible. As a bit of a selling point to my clients is to say, the better I train you, the less I'm going to ultimately support you. So it's really about imparting and transferring that knowledge and ownership of the system back to my clients, which is so critical for them to take on that mantle again.
I really love that point. And another thing you were saying in our prior chat was something around the best agencies use data really well. I think it's a big milestone in an agency's life cycle when they get to the point where they've recognized that they need to have better processes and best practice and better systems. I think there is a point where most agencies do get to where they recognize they need to be on PSA platform. But then you start collecting hopefully great data because you're using the system well. But the real opportunity is when you start leveraging that data. It's great that you're collecting it, but if you're only looking backwards and not really using it to drive your business forward, then that's a missed opportunity. So you should lean into that. So, Matt, yesterday I was speaking to a couple of people from an agency who were using a variety of tools and they're using a lot of spreadsheets. And these two individuals, one of them was operations, and I can't remember the other person's role, but they have been making a case for needing to move to a PSA and having more mature processes for years. But the MD just does not see the value. What these two individuals were saying is that they spend so much time trying to build reports and getting visibility on things and it being half accurate because not all the data is there. So there was just a huge number of issues. What advice would you give to somebody like that they could make a case to their MD and say there's value in this?
Oh wow, that's a loaded question. I definitely come across these types of business owners all the time, and they still run the business like they did perhaps when they first started the business, and they haven't
Mm,
chosen to evolve with standard operating procedures. Spreadsheets are always a great starting point to model the data points you
mhm,
want to capture, but that should not be the
mhm,
final destination. It is the starting point. And once you figure out as a business owner what you need, what is important, you need to very quickly get off that so that you can scale with software. Spreadsheets leave those business owners very exposed. That intelligence
mm,
is missed when you're just managing in spreadsheets and it gets
mhm.
lost in translation.
Absolutely. And I think it's also about reflecting on what your goals are. Do you just want to continue the best effort kind of thing that you've been doing to date? But what is your real goal? Is it growth? Or is it much higher revenues and profit? Or is it to sell your business? And if it's any of those things, then you do need to operate in a more mature way. Otherwise, you're going to be dragging yourself down and dragging yourself back. And the bigger your team gets, the more dangerous and laborious all of this becomes if you're just kind of operating in that really ad hoc way.
Correct,
Um,
correct. The administration should go down with an increase in
mhm,
team, not up
mm.
through the introduction of smart systems, for sure.
Absolutely. A growing, more mature business should be operating in a more efficient way. Otherwise, you're not doing things right. And another question somebody might have is, well, it might be a lot of work for us to export all these spreadsheets and do all this reporting manually and download timesheets and build timelines over there. But so is moving to a PSA platform. You're going to have to think about all this stuff and do all this thinking and implementation. That's also a lot of work. What would you say to a person having those thoughts?
I think you have to approach it with an open mind. Very often will I be speaking with these decision makers, and they're often referring back to past trauma of implementations gone bad, and they
Mm,
don't seem to learn from it. And so whether it's investing in training, planning
mhm.
and preparation, testing, and really ensuring that you don't compromise on those aspects.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately by implementing this, you're going to hit a new milestone of maturity in your business. You're going to be able to operate more efficiently and faster. And so see it as a project you're going to have to tackle. It's not going to be overwhelming. A lot of us, a lot of us have done this and are happier for it. So see it as a project just like anything else. And sometimes having two people, operations director and a finance director, hand in hand, driving those initiatives, following the onboarding process or the onboarding team just kind of gives you that motivation to keep going. In terms of like how long you think a process like this can take or should take, what are your thoughts on that?
I sort of like to sort of keep my projects to a 6 to 8 week cycle. I think
Mm,
once we get all our requirements together, we map
mhm,
that accordingly in that sort of design phase. We
mm,
should be able to quickly configure the
mm,
system and iterate and test each of those
mhm,
points. Like, I don't think you need to necessarily have everything built before you start testing. I think you can iterate and test, iterate and test. You don't need to
mm,
import a lot of data to do that from the outset. So I think that's critical to really understand the capabilities of the software, what you're
mhm,
trying to achieve. And then, I think a 4 week turnaround time is quite achievable to sort of get a working model that can be demonstrated or can be further opened for inspection of sorts to a wider
mm.
audience for acceptance testing before sort of getting that level of confidence to go
Yeah.
and load the rest of the or import data into the system.
Wow, that's super fast. So, if anyone's looking for speed on this kind of thing, they should definitely speak to you. I think 4, 6, 8 weeks. Are you saying from like discovery through testing, data loading, implementation, or
I
in
think you
doing
should
that?
have a I think you should have a proof of concept within 4 weeks. I think that's highly likely.
Okay.
Yeah, with, a
Hmm.
sample project, a sample quote of sorts, time and material-based projects versus your fixed fee-based projects, trying to resource
Mm-hmm.
plan and the like inside the system. I think you should have a really good working proof of concept within 4 weeks, and then
Mm-hmm.
decide the quality of the data that we're gonna load, decide what goes in, what's
Mm-hmm.
excluded, decide
Yeah.
on what sort of training plan to roll out the change, decide when an appropriate
Mm-hmm.
cutoff period is going to be, decide if you're going to have
Mm-hmm.
your account management team start loading quotes and projects proposals into the
Mm-hmm.
system sooner rather than later to sort of help ramp up in productivity and usage and payback
Mm-hmm.
of the software as well.
That's all really great advice. So, Matt, where can listeners find you if they're looking for advice or support?
You can visit businesscontinuum.com.au. I'm actually
Okay.
headed over to the States in a couple of months where I hope to be
Mm-hmm.
launching an office out of Denver. And so you'll see us waving the flag over in the States very, very soon. Reach out to us on LinkedIn or the website. You can book a time with
Mm-hmm.
me. I'm always open to talk and help you
Mm-hmm.
answer any questions.
Amazing. Excellent. That's really, really helpful. So, anyone, anywhere, please reach out to Matt if you need any advice. So it sounds like you guys are based in, is it Australia?
Yeah, that's right, Melbourne, Australia. But we sort of
Yep.
service all of Australia, New Zealand. We
Yep.
also work with companies in Europe as well, and so
Nice.
we work weird hours, but love it all.
Amazing. Matt, it's been a real pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really helpful advice. And I hope at some point we'll have you back and we'll have another topic for us to chat about.
Thank you so much, Harv. It's been great to chat with you and share my experience.
Hi, all. Just wanted to recap some of that conversation before we go. So, we talked about starting to build your list of requirements. talking to people in your team and ensuring that you have all the key kinds of functionality in mind that you will need, including having good reporting on the business. Matt mentioned that we shouldn't really add price to the list of considerations. You get what you pay for, and you're investing in your growth and future. You want the best tool for the job. Step two, once you have those requirements, was finding platforms that match your needs. So, you can do some Googling, but you can also use sites like G2 to find your product category. Check out the tools in the list or the logo grid, which is what I like doing on the category page to see what looks interesting, and then doing research on those product websites to see what you think would align. Eventually, you want to have a demo call or a test drive, share your requirements with the vendor, and see what they can or can't do. Find out what their onboarding process is like as well. And then we get into the implementation piece. Matt was suggesting being able to get to a good place in 4 to 8 weeks. I personally think that for an in-house team, even if you're the ops director and have a partner internally to drive this project forward, like maybe your finance director, you probably have lots of other stuff on your plate, and that 4 to 8 weeks might be a bit ambitious. Once I've brought in the tool, it's taken me about 3 months to go from configuration, testing, data loading, documentation for training, and then launch. That doesn't include creating the requirements, qualifying options, selecting, and that sales process as well. But again, if you need to go fast or don't have the headspace to drive it, then maybe there's a lighter approach you can take, or you can get support from a partner like Business Continuum, Matt's company. The key thing is to keep driving the project forward. What we didn't cover today was much of the change management piece, which underpins the entire process, particularly from the point of selecting a tool and moving towards implementation and launch. If you haven't already, that's your cue to listen to the recent episode with Claire Kwanzaa, where we talk about how to handle that to ensure your team buys into the change and that you can support them along the way. And of course, if you need any advice or help on this kind of process, you can reach out to Matt at businesscontinuum.com.au, or even drop me a note on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to share my advice and experiences with you as well. That's it for today's episode. If you haven't already, please sign up for the handbook newsletter at scoro.com/podcast. And please continue to share your feedback, share the episode with colleagues and friends, and rate us on Apple or Spotify. And if you've got successes, experiments, or lessons you want to share with the agency ops community, please drop me a note on LinkedIn and I'd love to chat. I'm at linkedin.com/in/harvnagra. Have a great week, and I'm looking forward to having you back in the next episode. This podcast is brought to you by Scoro, a platform designed for agencies and consultancies, which allows you to manage your projects, finances, and resources, all from one system. This is a platform I brought in at a previous workplace, which completely transformed the way we worked, and which I've recommended to clients of my own. You can sign up for a free trial on Scoro.com. That's SCORO.com. Or reach out to me, Harv Nagra, on LinkedIn if you'd like to hear about some of my experiences.